Welcome to the world of the Liberty Wheat Penny, one of America's most fascinating 1-cent coins and a favorite among collectors, history lovers, and treasure hunters. At first glance, this small copper coin may look ordinary, but every wheat penny carries a story from a different moment in American history. With the familiar portrait of Abraham Lincoln on the front and the iconic wheat ears surrounding the words, 1 cent, on the reverse, these coins connect us to generations of Americans who carried them in their pockets, saved them in jars, and sometimes unknowingly passed rare pieces from one hand to another. In today's video, we're taking a closer look at the Liberty Wheat Penny and exploring the details that can make certain examples much more interesting to collectors. We'll examine the date, mint mark, condition, color, strike quality, and possible minting errors that can separate an everyday old penny from a coin worth investigating. Some wheat pennies are common and affordable, while others can become highly desirable when they combine rarity, exceptional preservation, or a dramatic mint error. So before you dismiss an old penny as simply 1 cent, take a closer look, because the smallest details can sometimes tell the biggest story. The 1935 Liberty Wheat Penny is a small 1-cent coin that can look almost ordinary at first glance, yet every detail on its worn bronze surface carries a piece of American history. Struck during the middle of the Great Depression, the 1935 Lincoln cent was part of a denomination Americans used constantly for everyday purchases, from newspapers and candy to small household necessities. On the obverse, Abraham Lincoln's portrait dominates the coin, surrounded by Liberty and the date 1935, while the reverse displays the famous wheat ears framing 1 cent and United States of America. Most 1935 cents were made from a bronze composition of copper, tin, and zinc, giving genuine examples their familiar reddish-brown appearance when preserved and darker brown tones when exposed to decades of circulation. But this is where the story becomes interesting, because a 1935 cent is not automatically valuable simply because it is old. What matters is the exact mint, condition, strike quality, color designation, and whether the coin possesses a legitimate minting error or unusual characteristic that separates it from the millions of ordinary examples that survived. The Philadelphia Mint produced 1935 Lincoln cents without a mint mark, while Denver and San Francisco examples can be identified by their respective D and S mint marks beneath the date area. That tiny letter can dramatically change how collectors approach the coin, because mintages and surviving populations vary between issues, and collectors often build complete date-tan mint sets rather than simply collecting any old wheat cent they encounter. Under magnification, a 1935 cent can reveal fascinating evidence of its journey through the minting process. The sharpness of Lincoln's hair, the definition around his ear and cheek, the strength of Liberty, and the crispness of the wheat stalks can all help determine its grade. Original red coloration can also be especially desirable because copper-based coins naturally darken as they age, and a coin retaining significant original mint red color may attract considerably more attention than a heavily circulated brown example. Imagine finding one of these in an old jar, inherited collection, or forgotten box of change. The excitement begins not with assuming it is worth a fortune, but with realizing that one ordinary-looking cent deserves a much closer examination. And then there are the mistakes that can turn an interesting old cent into a genuinely intriguing numismatic discovery. Collectors pay attention to possibilities such as double design elements, off-center strikes, clip planchets, die cracks, unusual die deterioration, and other authentic mint-produced abnormalities. But there is an important warning. Damage that happened after the coin left the mint can easily be mistaken for an error. A scratch, machine doubling, flattened lettering, corrosion, environmental staining, or someone deliberately altering the coin can create appearances that seem extraordinary under casual inspection. That is why the most exciting moment is not necessarily when you think you have discovered a rare error. It is when the evidence survives careful scrutiny. Look closely at the date, the lettering, the wheat lines, the rim, and the relationship between the design and the edge. If doubling appears, examine whether the secondary image has characteristics consistent with a genuine doubled die rather than simple mechanical damage. A 1935 wheat cent with a legitimate, documented mint error is a completely different collecting proposition from an ordinary circulated cent with accidental marks. Now imagine the possibility ladder, but keep one rule firmly in mind. The figures we are about to discuss are illustrative scenarios, not guaranteed prices for a normal 1935 wheat penny. A minor but interesting variation might be imagined in the $2,500 to $3,500 range if it were an unusually desirable and authenticated piece. A more notable example could potentially enter a hypothetical $9,000 conversation when exceptional rarity, condition, and collector demand all come together. A high-grade coin might be discussed around $5,000 in a hypothetical market scenario, while an unusual mint anomaly could be imagined around $6,000. A rare collector piece could reach a hypothetical $7,500 level, and an exceptionally preserved or uncommon example might inspire an illustrative $8,000 scenario. An unusual find with strong collector demand could be imagined around $8,500, while an extraordinary or historically significant specimen might be discussed at up to $9,000 or beyond, depending on actual auction evidence. These numbers should never be treated as a promise that your 1935 cent is worth those amounts, because real value depends on authentication, grading, rarity, provenance, eye appeal, and the prices buyers are actually willing to pay. That distinction is incredibly important because coin collecting is filled with stories that sound almost unbelievable. Someone opens an inherited box, discovers a forgotten wheat penny, studies it under a magnifier, and suddenly wonders whether the tiny piece of bronze could represent a down payment on a home, a sudden windfall, or even a once-in-a-lifetime discovery. The reality is usually much more measured, and that is exactly what makes genuine discoveries so fascinating. Start with the basics. Weigh the coin using a properly calibrated scale, remembering that normal wear and environmental effects can cause small differences. Examine the metal color without cleaning or polishing it, because harsh cleaning can permanently reduce collector appeal. Check whether the rim is complete and properly formed. Inspect the strike alignment and compare suspicious features with known examples. Never scrape, sand, heat, chemically clean, or otherwise modify the coin in an attempt to reveal an error. Sometimes the greatest mistake a collector can make is damaging a potentially valuable coin while trying to prove that it is valuable. If your 1935 cent continues to look unusual after careful examination, the next step should be professional authentication rather than internet speculation. A reputable numismatist or established third-party grading and authentication service can evaluate the coin's authenticity, condition, color, strike characteristics, and possible errors. This matters because counterfeit coins, altered dates, repaired surfaces, artificial tunning, and exaggerated online claims can make a common coin appear much rarer than it really is. Pay particular attention to the mint mark, because the absence or presence of a letter beneath the date can help identify where the coin originated. Study the date under good lighting, rotate the coin rather than forcing the light directly onto it, and use magnification only to observe details, not to manufacture a story around every tiny mark. The goal is not to convince yourself that you have found a fortune. The goal is to establish what the coin actually is. That disciplined approach is what separates serious collecting from wishful thinking, and it can make the discovery itself far more rewarding. There is also something deeply emotional about the 1935 wheat penny, because this coin has survived far longer than the moment for which it was created. It passed through hands during an era when 1 cent still mattered, traveled through cash registers and pockets, disappeared into drawers, and somehow survived nearly a century to reach another generation. Its worn surface may contain no dramatic error at all, yet the history alone can make it worth preserving. And if a genuine rarity is hiding beneath that brown patina, the journey from an overlooked penny to a professionally authenticated collectible can feel like uncovering a forgotten chapter of American history. That is why you should check old coin jars, inherited collections, estate finds, antique boxes, and other everyday places carefully, but responsibly. The dream of discovering a coin valuable enough to change your financial situation is exciting, but the real treasure is learning to recognize why a particular coin is unusual rather than simply believing every sensational price claim. So before you dismiss that old 1935 Liberty Wheat Penny as just another 1-cent coin, take another look, because the difference between an ordinary survivor and an extraordinary numismatic discovery can sometimes be hidden in something incredibly small. A mint mark, a preserved original surface, a genuine doubled feature, an unusual strike, or a detail that millions of casual observers would never notice. Somewhere right now, another old coin may be sitting quietly in a drawer, jar, collection, or forgotten envelope, waiting for someone patient enough to examine it properly. Maybe the next coin you pick up will be nothing more than a common survivor, but what if it carries an authentic characteristic that changes the entire story? That unanswered question is where the real suspense begins, because the next shocking coin could be hiding in the most ordinary place imaginable. And when we uncover it, you may never look at pocket change the same way again. The 1941 Liberty Wheat Penny may look like nothing more than a worn little 1-cent coin, but in the right condition, with the right characteristics, it can become a fascinating piece of American history and a serious collector's discovery. Struck during a pivotal period just before the United States entered World War II, the 1941 Lincoln Wheat Cent carries the familiar portrait of Abraham Lincoln on the obverse, with the inscriptions Liberty and In God We Trust surrounding him, while the reverse displays the classic wheat ears framing 1 cent and United States of America. Unlike some wartime-era coins, the 1941 cent was still struck in the traditional bronze composition, giving genuine examples their warm copper-brown appearance when preserved properly. Millions were produced, so the date itself is not automatically rare, and that is exactly what makes the hunt so interesting. Collectors are not simply searching for the year, but for exceptional preservation, scarce varieties, dramatic minting mistakes, and coins with characteristics that separate an ordinary example from something truly unusual. Imagine finding one in an old box, inherited collection, forgotten jar, or estate lot, and realizing that the story behind the coin may be far more interesting than its 1-cent face value suggests. Look closely at the surface of a 1941 wheat penny, and you begin to see a miniature record of its journey through time. Lincoln's cheek, jaw, hair, and coat can reveal how much wear the coin experienced, while the wheat stalks on the reverse provide important clues about remaining detail and overall preservation. A heavily circulated example may show dark brown or reddish-brown tunning, scratches, small dents, and softened lettering, while a sharply preserved specimen can display crisp design elements and attractive original color. The mint mark is another important detail, because 1941 cents were struck at Philadelphia, Denver, and San Francisco, creating different collecting categories for enthusiasts. A 1941D or 1941S can attract attention depending on condition and scarcity within a particular grade, while an unmarked Philadelphia issue represents another part of the year's production history. But collectors know that the most exciting discoveries often begin when something looks slightly different from the coin beside it. A strange rim, unusual lettering, an apparent doubled feature, an off-center strike, or another genuine minting anomaly can transform a routine examination into a mystery worth investigating. And this is where the story becomes much more suspenseful, because not every strange-looking 1941 penny is a valuable error. Years of circulation can create scratches, dents, corrosion, chemical discoloration, machine damage, and other alterations that imitate genuine mint mistakes. A true doubled die, for example, results from a die-making process and can show characteristic separation or doubling in specific design elements, while ordinary damage usually produces irregular flattening or raised-looking marks without the same underlying structure. Strike alignment matters too. If the design appears noticeably shifted toward one side, examine whether the coin has an authentic off-center strike and whether the entire shape and rim support that conclusion. The rim itself deserves careful attention because an unusual broad area, missing portion, or distorted edge can sometimes provide evidence of a minting problem, although post-mint damage can create similar appearances. This is why the serious collector does not grab sandpaper, polish, chemicals, or tools and attempt to improve the coin. Cleaning can destroy surfaces and reduce collector appeal. Instead, handle the penny carefully by its edges. Photograph both sides, compare it with normal examples, and seek professional authentication before believing an extraordinary claim. Now comes the question that can make an ordinary coin hunt feel like a treasure hunt. What could a remarkable 1941 wheat penny actually be worth? The answer depends heavily on grade, color designation, mint mark, variety, error status, eye appeal, provenance, and documented sales, so there is no single price that applies to every coin. For storytelling purposes, imagine a ladder of possible outcomes rather than a guaranteed price tag. A coin with a minor collectible variation might be discussed in the range of $2,500 to $3,500 in an exceptional scenario, while a substantially more notable and authenticated example could be imagined around $9,000. A high-grade coin might be placed around $5,000, an unusual mint anomaly around $6,000, and a rare collector piece around $7,500. An exceptionally preserved or uncommon example could reach a hypothetical $8,000 level, while an unusual discovery backed by strong collector demand might be discussed around $8,500, with an extraordinary or historically significant example potentially reaching toward $9,000 in this illustrative storytelling ladder. These numbers are examples for the video and are never guaranteed values. Actual prices can be dramatically lower or higher depending on the specific coin and real market evidence. Think about what those possibilities would mean if you were the person holding the coin. A penny that had been sitting unnoticed for decades could suddenly feel like a small doorway into an entirely different world. Even a few $1,000s can represent a meaningful financial surprise, perhaps money toward a down payment on a home, an emergency fund, a family goal, or simply a sudden windfall that nobody expected to find inside an old collection. But the emotional power of coin collecting is not really about turning every old penny into a fortune. It is the possibility of making a once-in-a-lifetime discovery when everyone else sees only pocket change. The 1941 cent also connects us to an America on the edge of enormous change, when factories, families, workers, and communities were moving toward a period that would reshape the country and the world. Every surviving coin passed through some unknown combination of hands, stores, cash registers, pockets, drawers, and collections, and that unknown journey is part of what gives an old wheat penny its character. If you have a 1941 penny in front of you right now, slow down and examine it like a detective rather than assuming the date alone makes it valuable. First, check the weight with an accurate digital scale and compare the result with the expected specifications for a genuine 1941 bronze cent. A significant difference can justify further investigation, but it does not automatically prove an error. Next, Study the metal color under neutral lighting. Original copper coloration can vary naturally with age and storage, while bright artificial-looking surfaces may indicate cleaning or other alteration. Inspect the strike alignment, paying attention to whether the design sits normally within the rim or appears dramatically displaced. Examine the rim from different angles for unusual shapes, missing sections, or expansion, and then inspect the lettering and numerals under magnification for genuine-looking doubling rather than scratches or flattening. Most importantly, never rely on a dramatic internet claim or a single photograph to establish rarity. If the coin appears genuinely unusual, professional authentication and grading can determine whether the feature is a legitimate mint-made characteristic and can provide a much stronger foundation for any value discussion. There is also something strangely beautiful about the fact that a 1941 wheat penny does not need to look perfect to be interesting. A worn example can still preserve a piece of the era, while a brilliant, sharply struck specimen can reveal details that millions of people never noticed. Collectors may study color, surface quality, strike strength, die characteristics, mint mark placement, varieties, and documented auction history, turning what appears to be a simple 1-cent coin into a specialized field of research. And sometimes the most exciting discovery is not the coin that immediately screams rare, but the quiet one that contains a tiny clue, an unusual letter, an unexpected die characteristic, a strange rim, an alignment that seems just slightly wrong, or a combination of features that deserves a second look. That is why responsible collecting is so important. Preserve the surfaces, document what you see, compare carefully, and let evidence, not wishful thinking, tell the story. The possibility of a valuable discovery should inspire curiosity, not reckless conclusions. So the next time a 1941 Liberty wheat penny appears in an old collection, a jar of coins, a family box, or a forgotten drawer, do not dismiss it simply because it is small, brown, and familiar. Turn it over, examine the details, check the mint mark, study the rim, look for legitimate doubling, consider its weight and color, and remember that professional authentication is essential before assigning serious rarity or value. Most 1941 cents will remain ordinary collectible coins, but every search contains that tiny possibility that something unexpected is hiding among the familiar pieces. Maybe the next coin you pick up will reveal a remarkable mint error, an exceptionally preserved survivor, or a variety that makes collectors stop and look twice. And if you think this 1941 penny was interesting, wait until you see the next shocking coin, because sometimes the greatest treasures are not locked inside museum cases. They are hiding in the most ordinary places, waiting for someone curious enough to notice. The 1953 Liberty wheat penny, a 1-cent coin that looks ordinary at first glance, can become surprisingly fascinating when you slow down and examine every detail. Struck during an era when the United States was deep into the post-war years, the 1953 Lincoln wheat cent carries the familiar portrait of Abraham Lincoln on the obverse, and the 2 wheat ears framing 1 cent, and United States of America on the reverse. By this point in the wheat cent series, the design had already become an American classic, but the real story is found in the tiny differences created during production, circulation, and preservation. Millions of 1953 cents entered commerce, meaning most examples are common, worn, and worth only a modest amount. Yet that does not make every 1953 penny identical. A sharply struck example with attractive original surfaces, an unusual minting characteristic, or exceptional preservation can immediately become more interesting to collectors. Imagine finding one in an old jar, forgotten drawer, inherited collection, or box of loose change, and realizing that the little coin you almost ignored deserves a much closer look. That is where the hunt begins, because sometimes the difference between an ordinary wheat cent and a remarkable collectible is hidden in details so small that you need magnification to see them. The first thing that makes a 1953 wheat penny interesting is its place in the final decade of the classic wheat cent era. The coin was produced at a time when the Lincoln design had already spent decades passing through American hands, and every new batch reflected the precision and limitations of mid-century minting technology. Depending on the mint mark and condition, collectors may encounter 1953 cents associated with Philadelphia, Denver, or San Francisco production, so the tiny letter beneath the date can immediately become important. A Philadelphia example carries no mint mark, while Denver pieces display a D and San Francisco pieces display an S. That small letter can transform the identity of the coin and help collectors understand where it was made. Look closely at the date, the spacing of the digits, the portrait details, Liberty, and the rim. Then turn the coin over and study the wheat ears, lettering, and central inscriptions. Heavy circulation can flatten Lincoln's hair and jawline, soften the wheat stalks, and create a dull brown surface, while a better preserved coin may retain much sharper details and attractive original color. None of these characteristics automatically makes a coin extremely valuable, but together they create the evidence needed to separate a normal circulated piece from something worth investigating further. Then comes the part that can make a collector's pulse rise, searching for abnormalities. On a 1953 wheat penny, you should not assume that every strange-looking mark is a valuable mint error. Scratches, dents, corrosion, cleaning damage, machine doubling, and ordinary wear can create appearances that resemble genuine errors. True mint-made varieties or errors can be much more interesting because they were created during the manufacturing process rather than after the coin entered circulation. Examine the lettering for possible doubling, especially around the date and major inscriptions, but remember that genuine double-die characteristics have specific shapes and relationships that should be studied carefully rather than identified from a quick glance. Check the rim for unusual formation, the lettering for distortion, and the overall strike for signs of weakness or unusual alignment. A coin that appears slightly off-center can deserve additional attention, particularly if the design elements and rim characteristics support the possibility of a genuine mint error. But the most important lesson is patience. A dramatic-looking mark is not automatically rare, and a subtle characteristic can sometimes be far more meaningful. The goal is not to convince yourself that every unusual 1953 penny is a fortune, but to learn how to recognize when an ordinary-looking coin deserves a second look. Condition can be just as important as rarity, and this is where the 1953 wheat penny becomes especially exciting. Imagine two coins minted in the same year. One spent decades rattling around in pockets, vending machines, drawers, and cash registers, while the other somehow survived with minimal contact and remarkably sharp details. They may share the same date and basic design, but collectors can view them very differently. Look at Lincoln's cheek and jaw, the hair above his ear, the wheat lines on the reverse, and the sharpness of the lettering. Original reddish color can also be highly desirable in appropriately preserved Lincoln cents, while a darkened or cleaned surface may tell a very different story. This is why you should never polish a wheat penny in an attempt to make it look newer. Cleaning can permanently damage the surfaces and may reduce collector appeal. Instead, handle the coin by its edges, use soft lighting and magnification, and compare it with reliable references. If the coin appears unusually sharp, unusually colored, or potentially affected by a legitimate mint error, professional grading and authentication can provide a much more dependable answer than a guess based on a photograph or a dramatic internet claim. Now let's talk about the numbers, but with one important warning. The following figures are illustrative storytelling examples, not guaranteed prices for an ordinary 1953 wheat penny. A minor variation or interesting but less significant characteristic might be imagined in a $2,500 to $3,500 discussion when paired with exceptional circumstances. while a more notable and authenticated example could enter a hypothetical $9,000 conversation. A high-grade coin might be discussed around $5,000 in an illustrative scenario, while an unusual mint anomaly could be imagined around $6,000, and a rare collector piece around $7,500. An exceptionally preserved or uncommon example could be placed around $8,000, an unusual find with strong collector demand around $8,500, and an extraordinary or historically significant example could be imagined reaching as high as $9,000. But these numbers should never be treated as a promise that your 1953 penny is worth thousands of dollars. Actual value depends on the exact variety, mint mark, condition, color designation, authentication, certification, rarity, market demand, and documented sales of comparable coins. In other words, the difference between a normal circulated cent and a genuinely exceptional specimen is enormous, and the coin's story must be proven before a dramatic valuation means anything. Think about what a genuine high-value discovery could mean emotionally. For someone searching through an old collection, discovering an authenticated rarity could feel like finding a sudden windfall hiding in plain sight. In an extreme hypothetical scenario, a valuable coin might represent money comparable to a down payment on a home, a major financial surprise, or even a once-in-a-lifetime discovery that changes the way you think about ordinary pocket change. But the emotional power of coin collecting does not depend entirely on a huge price tag. A 1953 wheat penny can connect you with an America that existed more than 7 decades ago, when these coins were new, bright, and beginning their journey through everyday commerce. Maybe it passed through the hands of a worker, a child buying candy, a traveler paying for a meal, or a family saving coins in a household container. Every scratch and mark can be part of that journey. That is why collectors often become fascinated by these little pieces of metal. They are not simply objects with numbers attached to them. They are surviving fragments of ordinary history, and occasionally, one of those fragments turns out to be far more unusual than anyone expected. If you find a 1953 wheat penny that catches your attention, slow down before making any decision. First, identify the mint mark and compare the date carefully. Next, examine the coin's weight using an accurate digital scale, while remembering that normal wear and environmental damage can affect measurements, and that a weight difference by itself does not prove an error. Study the metal color and surface carefully, looking for signs of artificial alteration rather than assuming an unusual color means rarity. Check whether the strike appears properly centered, inspect the rim for abnormalities, and use magnification to investigate possible doubling around the date and lettering. Compare both sides of the coin and photograph it clearly without manipulating the surfaces. Most importantly, avoid cleaning, scraping, polishing, or chemically treating the coin, because those actions can destroy evidence and potentially reduce its value. If you believe you have discovered a legitimate mint error, rare variety, or exceptionally preserved specimen, professional authentication and certification are the safest way to establish what you actually have. A trustworthy expert can help distinguish genuine mint characteristics from post-mint damage, saving you from both unrealistic expectations and the possibility of overlooking something important. And that is what makes the 1953 Liberty Wheat Penny so captivating. The possibility that an ordinary-looking 1-cent coin could carry a story far more interesting than its face value suggests. Most 1953 cents are not hidden fortunes, and responsible collecting means accepting that reality while still keeping your eyes open for the unusual. Somewhere, however, old collections are being opened, forgotten jars are being emptied, inherited boxes are being sorted, and loose coins are being examined for the first time in decades. One of those coins could contain a subtle characteristic that previous owners never noticed. So the next time a brown wheat penny lands in your hand, do not rush to spend it simply because it says 1 cent. Turn it over, Study the date, inspect the mint mark, examine the rim, and look closely at the smallest details. Because the most exciting discovery may not be the coin everyone already knows about. It could be the strange little piece hiding where nobody thought to look. And if you think this 1953 wheat penny has already revealed everything it has to offer, stay with us, because the next coin may have an even more shocking story waiting just beneath its surface.